You step inside, and the change in air greets you immediately, cooler and still, carrying a faint scent of damp stone, old wood, and the metallic tang of copper that has rested in cold water. Your boots make a soft sound on the flagged floor, a sound that seems to belong only to this hour. The pot still rises before you in the dimness, its great rounded belly sitting silent and dark, the copper catching the first weak shaft of light from the high window. You do not hurry toward it. Instead, you pause just inside the door, letting your breathing slow, letting your eyes find the familiar shapes that wait in the shadows. The still house holds everything in perfect stillness. The washback in the corner, a tall wooden vat, stands empty now, its staves dry and silent. The spirit safe, that small brass-bound box with its glass windows, sits closed on its bracket, and the pipes that run from the still's head down toward the worm tub curve gently, without a single drip. You let the door rest open behind you, because no wind moves in the glen this morning, only a breath of air so slight it does not stir the cobweb that hangs from the iron bracket above your head. Your eyes travel to the worm tub, which sits to the right of the still, a large wooden vat raised on stone blocks, its dark oak staves bound with iron hoops that have dulled to a deep brown over years of service. The tub is full of cold water, and within that water, submerged entirely, the coiled copper worm waits. You walk toward it slowly, each step placed with care, not from any need for stealth, but from the simple desire to move through the morning without disturbance. The floor here is worn smooth from countless footsteps, and you know the slight slope where the stones dip toward the drain by the outer wall. You reach the worm tub and rest your hands lightly on its thick rim. The wood feels cool and slightly slick under your palms, the grain raised in fine ridges that you have traced many times before. The water inside is so clear and still that you can see the topmost curve of the copper coil just below the surface, a shadow of reddish gold that seems almost to glow as the light from the window strengthens. For a long moment you simply look at the coil, the way it spirals downward out of sight, the way the water magnifies its curves, the way a single tiny bubble clings to the inner bend. Then you remove your right hand from the rim and let your fingers sink slowly into the water. The cold closes around your skin in a single smooth sensation, not biting but deep. The kind of cold that feels as if it has been gathering since long before dawn. You lower your hand until your wrist is submerged, and you hold it there, feeling the temperature spread through your fingers. The water tells you that the burn is running full and cold, that the sluice gate is open just enough, that no warmth from the previous day's firing lingers anywhere in the system. This is what you have come to check, this simple fact, and you register it without haste, letting the cold become familiar. Your fingertips brush against the copper coil under the water. The surface is smooth and clean, no trace of the green patina that can form if the water sits too warm or too long. You move your hand along the curve, following it as far as your arm can reach without leaning further, and every inch of the coil feels exactly as it should, cool, slick, and solid. A few small particles of grit have settled on the bottom curve, nothing more than fine sand carried in by the burn water, and you make a mental note to flush the tub gently before the next firing season, an act that belongs to another day entirely. You withdraw your hand from the water, and the drops fall from your fingertips back into the tub with tiny musical plinks, each one sending a brief ripple across the surface before the stillness returns. You reach for the linen cloth that hangs from a peg on the tub side, a cloth kept there specifically for this purpose, and you dry your hand slowly, first the palm, then the back, then each finger in turn. The cloth is rough from many washings in the burn, and its texture feels pleasant against your chilled skin. Now you turn your attention to the wooden lid of the worm tub, which rests against the wall nearby. You lift it with both hands, feeling the weight of the soaked oak, and you settle it carefully onto the tub's top, fitting the edges into the groove that has been worn into the rim over many seasons. The lid drops into place with a soft, hollow thud, and the water inside is hidden once more, the coil left in darkness. You press down lightly on the center of the lid to be sure it sits true, and you run your fingers around the seam where wood meets wood, finding everything flush and secure. With the worm tub checked, you allow yourself a longer pause. You lean your shoulder against the stone wall of the still house, finding the spot where the stone is smoothed from just this kind of leaning, and you let your weight settle there. The wall is cool through your jacket, and its solid presence feels like an anchor in the quiet. From this position you can see the whole interior, the still, the washback, the spirit safe, the worm tub, all held in the growing grey light. Your eyes lift to the high window, a single pane of thick, bubbled glass set deep into the stone. Through it, the dawn sky has lightened further, and the first direct ray of sun, still low and golden, has begun to pierce the opening. It falls in a slanted column that catches the motes of dust floating in the air. You watch the dust motes as they drift and turn. Countless tiny specks that move without hurry, some rising on a current of warmer air, others sinking slowly toward the floor. They glitter faintly where the light strikes them, and then they pass into the shadow and disappear. Watching them is like watching a slow, silent snowfall that never reaches the ground, and you let your mind rest on this image for a long, easy stretch of time. The burn's hum continues outside, a sound so constant that it has become more of a texture than a noise, something felt in the bones as much as heard. The blackbird calls again, a single note repeated twice, and then it falls silent. Far up the glen, a ewe bleats once, its voice carrying thin and distant through the still air. These sounds do not disturb the quiet. They belong to it, like the few pale stars that still hang visible in the western sky. After a while, you push yourself gently away from the wall and walk back toward the still, your steps slow and even. You circle the great copper vessel, running your hand along its side where the metal is burnished to a dull gleam. The still is cold to the touch, not the residual warmth it holds during the distilling season, but the deep cold of metal that has rested for weeks in an unheated building. You can feel the slight swell of the pot's belly, the rivets that join the plates, the gradual taper as the neck rises toward the swan's neck, and the line arm that carries the vapors to the worm. All of it is silent now, empty, waiting. You check the small door of the furnace at the still's base, setting your hand flat against the iron. It is cold, of course, and the ash inside is long since cleared away, the grate scraped clean. You open the door anyway, swinging it slowly on its hinges, and you peer inside. The fire-brick walls of the furnace are stained black with years of peat smoke, and a faint sooty smell still lingers, though it is a dry, old smell, nothing fresh or acrid. You leave the door open for a moment, as if letting the furnace breathe, and then you close it again with the same careful slowness. You walk back to the door of the still house and stand in the opening, looking out at the glen. The light has grown enough now to show the detail of the landscape, the steep green slopes on either side, the silver thread of the burn winding down through the heather, the cluster of rowan trees by the bend where the water turns toward the malt barn. The sky is a wide, pale bowl, with thin clouds stretched in long ribbons that catch the first pink of sunrise. Nothing moves except the water and the clouds, and even their movement is so gradual that you can only perceive it if you look away and then look back. You breathe in the air, which carries the cool dampness of moss and the faint sweet hint of peat smoke from the drying kiln that smoulders day and night further down the glen. The smoke is just a thread, almost invisible against the brightening sky, but its scent is unmistakable, earthy and warm, a promise of the malt that is slowly drying on the perforated floor above the fire. Standing there in the doorway, you feel the deep stillness of the quiet season settle around you. There is no rush of steam, no gurgle of fermenting wash, no clink of the spirit safe, no sound of coopers or maltmen. Only you, the still house, and the slow turning of the earth toward another day. You let the stillness hold you for a count of slow breaths, and then you turn back inside, because there is still the small matter of the lamp to attend to. The oil lamp that you lit upon entering burns on its shelf, its flame steady and small, a yellow teardrop behind the sooted glass. You lift it by its wire handle and carry it over to the worm tub once more, holding it so that the light falls across the lid, the iron hoops, the damp patches where water has seeped and dried, leaving faint mineral traces. The light reveals nothing out of order, no cracks, no leaking joints, but you make this inspection anyway because it is part of the morning, part of the slow rhythm that holds the glen together. You set the lamp back on its shelf and lower yourself onto the wooden stool that stands by the spirit safe. The stool creaks slightly under your weight, a familiar sound. From here, you can see the whole still house, and you let your gaze travel slowly from one end to the other, noting the way the light has shifted on the floor, the way the shadows under the still have drawn back. The dust motes still dance in the sunbeam, and you watch them again, your hands resting loosely on your knees, your breathing deep and even. The morning stretches on, and you remain on the stool for what feels like a very long time, your mind not empty, but filled with the simple facts of the room, the cold copper, the clear water, the light, the silence. Outside, the burn continues its endless patient song, and the blackbird, somewhere up in the rowan tree, begins its full morning melody, a series of rich, fluted notes that fall through the air like water over stones. You listen without expectation, letting each note come and go, and you feel the temperature of the day just beginning to shift as the sun climbs higher above the ridge. Eventually you rise from the stool and return to the worm tub one last time. You place your palm flat on the lid and hold it there, feeling the cool vibration of the water beneath, the deep resting quiet of the coil. You do not lift the lid again because there is no need. Everything is as it should be, exactly as it was yesterday and the day before, exactly as it will be tomorrow when you make this same round in the same first light. You withdraw your hand and pick up the small tin cup that sits on the tub's rim, dipping it into the bucket of fresh water you brought in earlier. And you take a slow drink, the water tasting faintly of the copper it has passed through. Clean and sharp and cold, with the cup replaced, you walk toward the still house door, pausing to close it behind you as you leave, the iron key turning in the lock with the same solid click as before. Outside, the air is warmer now, the glen fully lit, and you stand for a moment on the threshold, looking once more toward the ridge where the sun has cleared the topmost rocks. Then you begin the familiar walk up the gentle slope toward the spring, your boots pressing into the dew-wet grass, each step carrying you further into the quiet of the morning, while the still house sits silent and dark by the burn, its door locked, its worm tub full of cold water, waiting. The still house door clicks shut behind you, and the sound marks a clean border between the dim interior and the wide open morning of the glen. You stand for a moment on the stone threshold, the iron key now slipped into the deep pocket of your jacket, where it rests with a small, familiar weight against your hip. The air outside is cooler than the still air within, yet it carries a freshness that the closed room could never hold, a blend of wet grass, damp stone, and the faint honeyed note of heather that only rises when the dew is thick and undisturbed. You breathe it in slowly, letting your lungs adjust to the change, and then you step away from the door, your boots meeting the packed earth of the yard. The slope you must climb begins almost at once, a gentle rise that leads away from the still house and up toward the darker green of the hillside. The path is no more than a faint track, worn by your own repeated passes, a ribbon of flattened grass and occasional bare soil that winds around clumps of rush and the scattered grey rocks that push up through the turf. You set your feet upon it with the ease of long habit, your pace unhurried, your gaze moving ahead to where the spring waits somewhere above, hidden yet by the shoulder of the hill. To your right, the burn runs parallel to your course for a short distance, its water the same water that feeds the worm tub, the same water that has travelled from the spring you seek. You hear its voice clearly now that you are outside, not the single note of the stillhouse, but a layered, continuous sound composed of many small falls and ripples. The burn tumbles over a low shelf of rock, sending a fine spray into the air that catches the low sun and turns it to a momentary glint, and then it settles into a deeper pool, where the surface is smooth and dark as polished glass. You pause to watch it for a few breaths, noting how the current slides around a submerged branch that has lain there since the last storm, its bark stripped clean and pale. Then you continue upward, leaving the burn's immediate edge as the path angles away from the water and climbs into the open hillside. The ground underfoot grows softer as you ascend, the grass giving way in patches to a thicker carpet of moss that yields slightly with each step. Small bells of heather brush against your trousers, their tiny purple blossoms still closed against the morning chill, and the scent of them rises, subtle and sweet. A few paces on, you step over a narrow rivulet that crosses the path, no wider than your hand, carrying water from a seep higher up. It trickles over a bed of dark pebbles and vanishes into a tangle of dwarf willow. You note its presence, the way it contributes its small share to the burn below, before moving past it and resuming the steady rhythm of your climb. The angle of the slope begins to ease as you approach the first terrace, a broad shelf where the hill pauses before rising again more steeply toward the ridge. Here, the grass is cropped short by sheep, and scattered among the green are the first outcrops of the grey granite that forms the bones of the glen. You stop to rest your hand on one of these boulders, its surface rough with lichen that forms patterns of pale grey and dusty orange, a slow growth that has taken decades to spread only an inch. The stone is cold and dry under your palm, and you leave your hand there for a long moment, feeling the solidity of the hill itself. Far below, the still house roof appears as a dark rectangle against the green, the burner silver thread beside it, and the whole arrangement looks impossibly small and quiet from this height. You turn away from the view and continue across the terrace, your path now taking you past the scattered bones of an old dry stone wall that once marked the boundary of a sheepfold. Only the lowest course of stones remains, each one covered in a thick pelt of moss that glows a vibrant emerald where the morning light strikes it. A wren darts out from a gap in the stones and flits low across the grass, its tiny body a blur of brown motion, and then it disappears into a clump of bracken without a sound. You watch the bracken fronds sway once and then go still, and you move on. The spring is not far now. You can sense it in the way the air grows slightly cooler, in the way the sound of running water, absent for a while as you climb the higher ground, begins to return, not the rush of the burn, but a softer, closer trickling. The grass underfoot grows lusher, a deeper green fed by the moisture that seeps through the soil, and you see the first cluster of pale green watercress growing in a natural hollow. You step around it carefully, your boots sinking just a little into the damp ground, and then you round the shoulder of a large outcropping, and the spring is before you. The spring emerges from a cleft in the hillside, a dark opening where the granite has split along some ancient seam, and the water wells up clear and cold from the heart of the rock. Someone many years ago built a small stone cistern around the source, a rough basin of flat stones fitted without mortar, their edges darkened by the constant moisture. The water fills this basin to a steady level and then spills over a narrow lip into a channel that feeds the pipe leading down to the worm tub. The pipe itself is made of lengths of hollowed elderwood joined with brass collars, and it runs away downhill, half hidden in the grass, its burden of water moving in silence. You kneel beside the cistern, the knees of your trousers pressing into the damp moss that grows thickly around the stones. The water in the basin is so clear that you can see every detail of the granite floor beneath, the flecks of mica that catch the light, the small rounded pebbles that have gathered in a corner, the fine threads of green algae that wave slowly in the gentle current. Your reflection hovers on the surface, a dark shape with the sky behind it, and you wait a moment for the water to settle after your approach before you reach forward. A few fallen leaves have drifted onto the surface, birch leaves mostly, their edges browned and curled, and one or two thin twigs that the wind carried from the rowan tree higher up. You extend your hand slowly and lift the first leaf by its stem, the water beading and falling from it in heavy drops. You place it on the grass beside you, where it lies flat and dark, and then you reach for the next, your movements unhurried, each leaf taken individually until the surface of the cistern is clear. The twigs you collect in a small bundle and set aside, and then you dip your fingers into the water itself to feel the small grate that covers the mouth of the pipe. The grate is made of copper wire woven into a mesh, and it has been pushed slightly askew, perhaps by a passing animal. You ease it back into its proper seat with a gentle pressure, the wire cold and smooth under your fingertips. A few strands of waterweed have wrapped themselves around the mesh, and you tease them free, pulling them away slowly and laying them on the stones to dry. The water flowing through the grates seems to quicken just a little now that the obstruction is gone, and you watch it disappear into the dark opening of the elderwood pipe, carrying its cold clarity down to the worm tub, where you will later find it waiting. With the grate cleared and the cistern tidy, you sit back on your heels and look around. The spring has its own small patch of sky above it, a clearing in the overhanging branches of a hawthorn tree that leans out from the cleft. The hawthorn is thick with shiny leaves, and a few late white blossoms still cling to the higher branches, their scent faint and clean. You settle yourself onto the flat rock beside the cistern, a seat you have used many times, its surface worn smooth by your own weight. The rock is cool even through your jacket, and it angles slightly back, allowing you to lean naturally against the mossy bank behind. You let your breathing find its own slow rhythm, and you listen to the spring. The sound of the water emerging from the rock is not loud, merely a continual low note, a gurgle that rises and falls subtly as the pressure within the hillside shifts. It is a sound you could listen to for hours, and in fact, you often have, letting it fill your mind until everything else recedes. Above the spring's voice, you hear the distant call of a buzzard somewhere up on the ridge, a thin, mewing cry that hangs in the air and then fades. The sun has climbed high enough now to touch the ground around you, and small patches of warmth appear on your shoulders and the backs of your hands. You look down at the grass beside the rock, where the dew still clings in heavy beads to every blade. Each droplet is a perfect sphere, trembling slightly, and each one holds a tiny inverted picture of the world, the blue sky, the green hill, the dark shape of your own knee. The sun catches them and turns them to scattered points of white light, a field of brief stars that will vanish as the day warms. You watch them without counting, letting your gaze move from one to the next in a slow, random progression. The air carries the scent of the peat smoke from the malt kiln, a thread of it winding up from the glen below, and here at the spring it mixes with the cool mineral smell of the water and the green scent of moss. The peat smoke is warmer, earthier, and it reminds you of the drying floor where the barley is slowly turning from pale cream to a gentle tan. You picture the kiln, the smouldering blocks of peat, the malt laid out in an even bed. But you do not hold the image for long. It drifts away like the smoke itself, and you are left with only the present moment. A frog, small and dark, plops into the cistern from the bank, its entry marked by a single soft splash and a ring of ripples that spread to the edges and then disappear. It settles on the bottom, its legs tucked under it, and you watch it through the clear water, its throat pulsing faintly. You do not move to disturb it, and after a time it swims into the shadow under the rock, becoming just another shape in the dimness. The sun moves almost imperceptibly across the sky, and the patch of warmth on your shoulders shifts lower, reaching your upper arms. You feel a deep heaviness of calm settle into your bones, a quiet that is not sleep, but something close to it. A state in which the boundary between your own awareness and the world around you grows thin. The spring continues to flow, the frog remains hidden, the buzzard calls once more from a greater distance, and you remain on the flat rock, your hands resting palm up on your thighs, your eyes half closed against the growing light. After a time that cannot be measured, you stretch your legs out in front of you and cross your ankles. The movement is slow and deliberate, and the fabric of your trousers rustles softly against the rock. You notice a small feather caught on a blade of grass near your boot, a barred feather from a wood pigeon that must have passed this way during the night. You pick it up and turn it in your fingers, feeling the smoothness of the barbs, the resilience of the quill, and then you set it adrift on the surface of the cistern, where it floats in a slow circle before drifting over the lip and into the channel that feeds the pipe. You watch it travel a few inches until it catches on a stone and stops, a tiny boat at anchor. The water continues its endless journey downhill, sliding into the elderwood pipe and racing silently toward the worm tub. And the thought of that connection, the spring feeding the tub, feeding the pot, holds in your mind for a moment before dissolving into the general peace. You sit a while longer, until the sun has cleared the hawthorn tree and the rock beneath you has lost its chill entirely. And only then do you consider rising, though you do not rise yet. You linger because the spring asks nothing of you, because the morning is still young, because the only task remaining is to return to the still house and the drying floor and the peat stack, and all of those things will wait. You leave the spring when the sun has grown warm enough to dry the dew from the highest blades of grass, and the frog has long since settled into its shadow under the rock. Rising from the flat stone is a slow, deliberate act, your knees straightening by degrees, your hand pressing briefly against the mossy bank for balance. The world tilts for a moment as blood moves through your legs, and then everything steadies into the familiar vertical. You look once more at the cistern, noting that the water level remains true, that the elderwood pipe is running clear, that the small feather you set adrift has disappeared downstream. Then you turn away and begin the descent back toward the glen floor. The path down feels different from the climb up, as it always does. Gravity now pulls gently at your heels, and your steps come a little easier, though you keep your pace just as slow. You pass the ruined sheepfold with its emerald cap of moss, the boulder with its lichen map, the narrow rivulet still trickling over its dark pebbles. The burn's voice grows louder as you near the bottom, its layered sound rising to meet you, and soon the slate roof of the still house appears through the rowan trees. You stop for a moment where the path levels out, breathing the air that now carries the full warmth of mid-morning, and then you walk the last few yards to the door. The key comes out of your pocket with the same solid weight, and you fit it into the lock and turn it with a motion that feels ancient and complete. The door swings inward into the dimness, and you step across the threshold, pulling the door close behind you so that only a thin blade of daylight remains at the jamb. Inside, the still house has held its coolness. The air wraps around you like a cloth dipped in the burn. The high window still admits its slanting column of light, though the angle has shifted noticeably since you first arrived, the beam now falling further across the flagged floor and touching the base of the worm tub with a pale, diffuse glow. You walk directly to the tub, your boots making their quiet sound on the stone. The oil lamp still burns on its shelf, its flame steady and small, and you lift it by its wire handle and carry it over to the tub, setting it on the broad rim where a flat section of the oak stave provides a natural shelf. The lamp's light joins the daylight, creating a warm pull of yellow that pushes back the shadows around the tub. You stand for a moment, hands resting on the rim, and you look down at the wooden lid that you replaced earlier. Nothing has disturbed it, the fit is still flush, the iron hoops still cool. The water beneath, still holds its cold, still cradles the copperworm in utter stillness. You reach forward and curl your fingers under the lip of the lid, finding the small recess that serves as a handle. The wood is damp and cool, and you lift slowly, using the strength of your whole arm rather than just your wrist. The lid rises with a soft suction sound, breaking its seal against the rim, and water droplets scatter onto the tub's edge, where they gleam like tiny glass beads. You carry the lid to the wall and lean it there, careful to set it on its edge so that the inner face can dry without picking up grit from the floor. Then you return to the tub and stand looking down into the open water. The worm is fully visible now, the entire spiral of thick copper tubing submerged in the cold, clear water. The lamp flame, small as it is, sends light rippling down through the water and across the metal, so that the coils seem to shift and move even though they are perfectly still. The copper glows a deep reddish brown, the color of old pennies or the flank of a roe deer in autumn, and the water magnifies every curve, every joint, every rivet. You can see the worm's entire path, from the entry pipe that comes through the tub side near the top, down through the widening spiral that fills the tub's belly, to the narrow exit pipe that leads out near the bottom and runs away to the spirit receiver. All of it rests in the cold water like some great sleeping creature, and the sight of it holds you for a long, easy moment. You roll back the sleeve of your jacket, baring your right forearm to the cool air, and then you lower your hand slowly into the tub. The water closes around your wrist, your forearm, the cold spreading upward in a single smooth wave. You pause when your hand reaches the level of the uppermost coil, and you let your palm hover just above the copper, feeling the chill radiating from the metal even through the water. Then you touch the coil with your fingertips, the contact so light that at first you feel only the coolness, and then the smooth, polished surface registers against your skin. You begin to move your hand along the curve of the coil, following it as it spirals downward. Your palm skims over the metal with the barest pressure, reading the surface like a blind man reading a familiar face. The copper is smooth and flawless under your touch, a uniform sleekness that speaks of careful maintenance and good water. You trace the first full turn of the spiral, and then the second, your arm sinking deeper into the tub as you go. The water, disturbed by your movement, sends gentle currents against your face where you lean close, and you catch the faint metallic scent of the copper, clean and cold and sharp. You are checking for the green patina that can bloom on copper when conditions turn too warm or the water grows stagnant. This patina, a soft, powdery deposit the color of verdigris, will appear first in the crevices, the joints, the places where the coil bends tightest. You run your thumb into each of these bends, feeling the slight indentation where the pipe was curved by heat and skill. There is nothing but smooth metal, no roughness, no discoloration. The copper is as clean as the day the worm was first seated in the tub, years ago now, when a travelling coppersmith from the lowlands spent a fortnight in the glen fashioning it. Your fingers find the first of the riveted joints where two sections of the coil are joined by a ring of small copper rivets. You pause here, tracing each rivet head with the tip of your index finger. They are all flush, all tight, none raised or loosened by the constant expansion and contraction of heating and cooling. You count them without meaning to. A silent tally that registers and is forgotten. Then you move on, following the coil downward into the deeper water where the light from the lamp fades and the copper becomes a darker, more mysterious red. At the bottom of the tub, where the final coil rests just inches above the wooden floor, you pause again. This is where any sediment carried in by the burn water will settle, the fine grit and tiny fragments of waterweed that managed to pass through the mesh at the spring. You cup your hand and run it lightly over the bottom of the tub, feeling the smooth oak staves, and then you sweep your palm across the lowest curve of the coil. A few minute particles of grit come away on your skin, nothing more than a fine dark dust that dissolves when you rub your fingers together underwater. You make a note to flush the tub before the next firing, as you always do, and then you begin the slow ascent, your hand retracing its path upward along the coils. Your arm emerges from the water dripping and chilled, the skin pinked by the cold. You rest your forearm on the tub's rim for a moment, letting the water run off in rivulets, and then you reach for the linen cloth that still hangs from its peg. You dry your arm slowly, passing the cloth from wrist to elbow with a deliberate, circular motion, feeling the warmth return to your skin. Then you hang the cloth back on its peg and turn your attention to a different cloth, a softer one made of fine, worn linen that you keep folded in the small wooden box on the shelf beside the lamp. This cloth you dip into the tub, submerging it fully until it is heavy with cold water, and then you wring it out gently so that it remains damp but not dripping. You lean over the tub once more, and you begin to wipe the accessible upper coils of the worm, the ones that sit nearest the surface. The cloth passes over the copper in slow circular strokes, each one overlapping the last, and the metal beneath emerges with a renewed gleam, the faintest film of water cloudiness lifted away. The movement is hypnotic in its repetition, the circle of the cloth mirroring the circle of the coils, and you find your breathing falling into the same rhythm. You work your way around the entire visible spiral, reaching down as far as your arm will go to wipe the deeper coils. The cloth grows cold in your hand, and twice you pause to dip it again and wring it out, the water plinking back into the tub with a sound like distant bells. The lamplight follows your movements, the small flame guttering once when a draught finds its way through the high window and then steadying. You wipe the entry pipe where it passes through the tub wall, a straight section of copper that turns downward at a sharp angle, and you wipe the exit pipe at the bottom, which runs horizontally for a few inches before curving upward to its final height. Every inch of accessible copper receives the same slow, circular attention. You lean back from the tub and inspect your work. The upper coils now shine with a wet, polished luster, the lamplight reflecting in a chain of golden highlights that curve downward into the darker water. The cloth is greyed with a faint residue of what was barely there, and you rinse it in the bucket of fresh water, watching the cloud of particles disperse and settle. Then you wring it out a finely time and fold it neatly, setting it on the shelf to dry. Now you turn your attention to the interior of the coil, though you cannot see it directly. The worm is hollow, a continuous tube through which the vapors will travel when the still is fired, and the condensation from the last spirit run may still linger inside. You bend low and bring your eye close to the open end of the line arm where it enters the worm tub, the point where the vapor pipe from the still's head connects to the worm's entry. The opening is dark and small, and you can see nothing within, but you can smell the faintest ghost of the last distilling, a clean, spirituous note that carries no hint of sourness or taint. That is good. It means the coil interior is sweet and clean, that no residue has turned. You straighten and move around the tub to the exit pipe, where a small brass valve controls the flow of condensed spirit into the receiver. The valve is closed, of course, and has been for weeks. You touch the cool brass, turning the handle a fraction of an inch just to feel its smooth operation, and then you close it again. A single bead of clear liquid trembles at the mouth of the pipe, a remnant from the last run, and you watch it for a moment before it falls with a tiny, perfect plink onto the wood below. You wipe it away with your thumb, and the spot it leaves is quickly dry. You walk back to the tub's side and stand looking down at the worm one last time. The coils rest in their cold bath, silvered by the daylight and gilded by the lamp, and the water has settled back to its perfect stillness. The ripples of your work, long since faded. Everything you have seen and felt tells you that the worm is ready, that the still could fire tomorrow if the season demanded it. But the season does not demand it. The quiet season stretches on, and the worm will wait, submerged in its cold water, until the malt is dried and the wash is ready and the first peat fire is lit in the furnace. You lift the lamp from the rim of the tub and carry it back to its shelf, your shadow swinging large and distorted across the stone walls. Then you return to the tub and stand at its side, looking at the wooden lid where it rests against the wall. You pick it up with both hands, feeling again its damp weight, and you carry it to the tub. Settling it into place is a matter of patience and precision. You align the near edge with the groove in the rim, feeling the slight resistance as the wood finds its seat, and then you lower the far edge slowly, letting the lid drop the last quarter-inch with a soft, hollow thud. You press down around the entire circumference, checking the fit with your fingertips, and you find it true everywhere. You take a step back and look at the tub, now closed and quiet, its lid damp with condensation, its iron hoops dark and solid. The tub seems to settle into itself, a heavy, patient presence in the dim room. Outside, the burn continues its song, and the light through the high window has shifted further still, the beam now touching the base of the still and climbing its curved copper flank. The dust motes still dance in the light, countless and slow, and you watch them for a little while before you turn away, your examination of the worm complete. The still house door clicks shut behind you. It sounds small and final, and you turn your face toward the malt barn. The sun has climbed well above the eastern ridge now, and the yard between the buildings holds a gentle warmth that rises from the packed earth and the stone walls, a warmth that feels entirely different from the cool damp of the early morning. The air carries the dry, biscuity scent of barley changing under heat, and beneath that, the deeper, earthier smell of peat smoke, no longer a mere thread, but a steady presence that seems to wrap itself around the whole of the glen. You cross the yard with the same slow pace you have kept all morning, your boots pressing into ground that has dried just enough to lose its morning slickness, the blades of grass springing back as you pass. The path to the malt barn leads away from the burn, angling across a gentle slope where whin bushes grow in thick tangled clumps, their yellow blossoms bright, even in the muted light. You brush past one of these bushes, and the coconut scent of the flowers rises briefly before fading into the peat smoke. A few bees move among the blossoms, their bodies heavy and dark. They hum a low note that blends with the distant rush of water. You pause to watch them for a moment, noting how they visit each flower with the same methodical patience you bring to your own tasks. And then you continue on, the barn growing larger with each step. The malt barn is a long, low building of stone, older than the still house, its walls thick, and its roof a deep blanket of heather thatch, held down by ropes weighted with stones. From the ridge vent, a plume of pale blue smoke rises straight up for a few feet before the breeze catches it and lays it out in a thin, drifting ribbon that trails down the glen toward the river. The door stands open, a dark rectangle in the grey stone, and you can see the dim, golden-brown glow of the interior even from a distance. The light inside seemed to breathe with the smoke. You walk the last few yards and step across the threshold, pausing just inside to let your senses adjust. The warmth receives you at once, closing around your body like a heavy, soft blanket. It is not the sharp, dry heat of a forge or an oven, but a humid, living warmth that seems to rise from the very ground and fill every inch of the space, from the packed earth floor to the high, shadowed rafters. The air is thick with the scent of germinating grain, a sweet, malty fragrance that reminds you of new bread and mown hay, and woven through it is the unmistakable smell of smouldering peat, earthy and ancient, like the floor of a forest after rain. You stand for a long moment just within the door, breathing it all in, letting your eyes grow accustomed to the dimness. The interior of the barn is a single, long chamber, dominated by the great drying floor that stretches almost the entire length of the building. The floor is made of perforated iron plates, each one perhaps 2 feet square, laid over a framework of heavy oak beams that span the width of the kiln pit below. Thousands of small holes pierce the iron, each one a channel for the heat and smoke that rise from the peat fire, and through these holes the warm air flows in a constant, invisible current that you can feel on your face and hands. The malt itself lies in a thick, even bed across the plates, a carpet of pale grain that stretches from wall to wall, its surface gently rippled where the shield has passed. You stoop and remove your boots, setting them side by side just inside the door, for the drying floor is a surface you will walk upon only in your stocking feet. The stones here at the threshold are cool and dry, but as you step forward onto the iron plates, the warmth rises through the soles of your feet, spreading upward through your ankles and into your calves. The sensation is deeply pleasant, a steady, penetrating heat that seems to loosen something tight in your muscles, and you stand still for a moment, simply feeling it, your weight settling evenly onto the warm metal. Before you take up the shield, you walk to the small iron hatch set into the wall at the far end of the barn, a door no larger than a breadboard that opens into the kiln chamber below. You lift the latch, which is warm to the touch, and swing the hatch inward, bending low to peer into the darkness beneath the drying floor. The kiln pit is a low, brick-lined space, and in its center the peat fire glows a deep, steady red. The embers are shaped like a small, flattened dome, their surfaces pulsing faintly as the draft moves across them, and above them the underside of the iron plates is visible, dark and hot, with thin tongues of blue smoke licking up through the holes. The air that rises from the hatch carries a sharper note of the peat, more acrid than the softer scent above, and you note the even spread of the embers, the absence of any cold spots, before you close the hatch gently and straighten. The shield rests against the wall near the door, a long-handled tool with a broad wooden head and a row of smooth, rounded teeth. You walk to it and take it up, feeling the familiar weight settle into your hands. The handle is made of ash, worn to a dark, glossy smoothness by years of use, and it fits your grip as though it were shaped for you alone. The head of the shield is wide and flat, the teeth spaced evenly, each one polished by the constant friction of the grain. You carry it across the warm floor to the near edge of the malt bed, and you lower the teeth into the barley with a slow, deliberate motion. The first stroke is always the same. The wooden teeth sink into the grain with a soft, hissing sound, parting the kernels and lifting them in a gentle wave that crests and then falls back as you push forward. You walk slowly behind the shield, your arms moving in a rhythm that has become second nature, and the barley flows around the teeth like water around a stone, the individual grains clicking softly against one another as they tumble. The heat from below rises more strongly where you have disturbed the bed, and you feel it on your shins and knees, a warm breath from the earth itself. You work your way down the length of the floor, the shield describing a long, straight furrow through the malt. At the far end you lift the head clear and turn, drawing the shield back in the opposite direction, the teeth cutting a new path parallel to the first. The sound changes subtly as you go, the initial hiss giving way to a drier rustle as the upper layers of grain, already warm, mix with the cooler, moister kernels from beneath. This is the purpose of the turning, to bring the damp grain to the surface and send the dry grain down, so that every kernel receives the same share of heat and smoke. After 3 passes, you pause and dip your hand into the bed, lifting a small heap of the barley and holding it close to your face. The grains are plump and pale, their color shifting from a creamy white at the tips to a light golden tan where the heat has worked longest. You take a single kernel between your thumb and forefinger and squeeze. It yields slightly but does not break, and no milky liquid appears. This tells you that the drying is progressing well, that the moisture is leaving the grain at the proper rate, neither too fast nor too slow. You let the barley pull back through your fingers, where it lands with a soft patter, and you take up the shield again. The smoke thickens for a time as you turn a section near the center of the floor, a pale blue cloud that curls up around your knees and hangs in the still air. The scent of it fills your nose and mouth, peaty and sweet, with a hint of something floral, heather perhaps, and you breathe it in deeply, knowing that this very smoke is becoming part of the malt, part of the spirit that will one day sleep in the casks in the warehouse. The thought is a quiet one, barely formed, and it drifts away like the smoke itself as you continue your slow passage across the warm iron plates. The only sounds in the barn are those of your own making, the soft hiss and rustle of the shield, the gentle crackle of the grain as it shifts, the faint creak of the wooden handle when you change direction. Outside, the glen continues its day, the burn running, the buzzard calling, the bees still working the wind blossoms, but these sounds are muffled and distant, as though they belong to a world separated from this one by more than walls. Within the barn, there is only the warmth and the grain and the slow, steady motion of your work. After a time, you carry the shield back to its resting place and walk to the low wooden bench that sits against the wall near the door. The bench is old, its seat worn to a smooth hollow, and you lower yourself onto it with a sigh that is more contentment than weariness. From here you can see the whole length of the drying floor, the malt spread out in its pale golden bed, the smoke drifting lazily upward from the plates. The shafts of light that fall through the small windows under the eaves are visible now as distinct columns of gold, filled with countless motes of grain dust that dance and swirl without hurry. You watch them for a long while, your hands resting loosely on your thighs, your breathing slow and deep. The warmth of the floor penetrates through the soles of your feet and rises through your whole body, and you feel a pleasant heaviness settle into your limbs. The kind of heaviness that comes from standing in one place for a long time and then finally resting. You close your eyes for a few breaths, not to sleep, but simply to feel the heat and the stillness more completely. When you open them again, the light in the barn has shifted slightly. The golden columns angled a degree further, and you know that the morning has moved on into early afternoon. You rise from the bench and take up the shield once more. The malt needs one final turning before you leave it to the steady heat of the kiln, and you set to the task with the same unhurried pace. This time you work from the far end back toward the door, the teeth of the shield biting gently into the grain, the sound a soft, continuous whisper. The barley is noticeably drier now than it was when you began, the kernels lighter in weight, their color a uniform pale gold that glows warmly in the dim light. The smoke has thinned as the fire below burns down to a deep bed of embers, and the air in the barn is clearing slightly, the haze retreating toward the ridge vent. When the last pass is complete, you carry the shield to the wall and set it upright in its accustomed place, the handle leaning against the stone. You stand at the edge of the drying floor and look back at the malt, assessing it with eyes that have done this 1,000 times. The bed is even and smooth, the grain resting in a state of quiet transformation, no longer green and living, but not yet fully dried. It will need more time and more peat before it is ready for the mill, but for now, it is exactly where it should be. You walk to the door and sit on the bench one last time to put on your boots, the leather warm from the barn's heat and supple in your hands. You lace them slowly, crossing the cords and pulling them snug, and then you rise and step toward the open door. The cooler air from outside meets you at the threshold, a gentle current that feels fresh and clean after the kiln's embrace, and you pause there, one hand resting on the doorframe, looking out at the glen where the afternoon light is beginning to soften. Then you step through and leave the malt barn, pulling the door partway closed behind you, so that the smoke can still escape and the warmth can hold steady within. The door of the malt barn settles into its frame with a soft bump, and you stand in the yard for a moment, breathing the cooler air, feeling the warmth of the drying floor slowly recede from your skin. The sun is higher now, the morning haze burned away, and the sky above the glen has deepened to a clear, pale blue that holds no clouds at all. The shadows of the buildings have drawn back to their own foundations, and the stones of the still house wall show their true color in the full light. A warm grey flecked with silver mica that glints when you move your head. You turn away from the barn and walk slowly around its gable end, where the grass grows long and the ground begins its gentle rise toward the dark stripe of the moor. The peat stack stands behind the malt barn, sheltered by a low dry stone wall that curves around it on 3 sides to break the wind. You approach it along a narrow path of flattened grass, the same path you have worn over the months of the drying season, and as you draw near, the shape of the stack resolves into its familiar form. It is built of blocks of peat cut from the moor in the early summer, each one roughly the size of a small loaf, dark and fibrous, with the marks of the cutting spade still visible on their sides. The blocks have been stacked in alternating layers, each course laid at a right angle to the one below, so that the air can move through the stack and keep the peat dry even as the damp of the glen settles on everything else. You stop a few paces from the stack and simply look at it for a while. The peat has been your companion through many quiet seasons, a slow, steady presence that asks nothing and gives everything. The blocks on the exposed outer face have dried to a lighter brown, almost grey where the sun has struck them longest, while those deeper in the stack remain a darker, richer colour, the colour of wet earth and old forests. A fine dark dust has gathered in the crevices between the blocks, and small fragments of dried moss and heather stem protrude here and there from the fibrous surface, remnants of the plants that grew on the moor 1,000 years before they were cut. The morning after the fox passed through has left its small signature on the stack. You notice it as soon as you step closer. 3 or 4 blocks near the bottom of the outer face have been dislodged, nudged out of their places by a curious nose or a paw seeking warmth in the night. The blocks have not fallen far, merely shifted outward and down, and they rest now at the base of the stack in a small, untidy heap. A few fragments of dry peat have crumbled away and scattered across the grass, dark crumbs against the green. You kneel down slowly, your knees finding the soft ground, and you begin to set things right. The first block you lift is surprisingly light for its size. The interior of the peat dried to a spongy firmness that holds its shape but weighs little. You turn it in your hands, feeling the rough, fibrous texture against your palms, the slight give of the material when you press with your thumbs. The outer surface is crusted with a fine, dark powder that comes away on your skin, and the inner face where it was cut is smoother, showing the fine layering of the compressed vegetation, a pattern of horizontal lines that looks almost like the grain of wood. You fit the block back into its place in the stack, pressing it gently until it sits flush with its neighbours, and then you reach for the next. This second block is slightly larger and heavier, still holding some of the moisture of the moor deep within its core. The dampness has darkened it to a deep, rich brown, and it feels cool and solid in your hands, more like stone than earth. You turn it over, noting how the cut face shows the imprint of the spade in a series of fine, parallel grooves, and then you slot it into the space beside the first block, adjusting its angle until it locks into place. The fit is snug, the block held by the weight of the courses above, and you run your fingers along the join to be sure that no gap remains for the wind to work at. The third block is split along a natural fault line, a crack that runs diagonally through the peat from one corner to the centre. You lift the 2 halves separately, holding one in each hand, and you examine the broken faces. The interior of the peat is a darker, denser material than the crust, threaded with pale fibres of undecomposed heather root and the occasional dark speck of ancient charcoal. The scent that rises from the broken block is sharper and earthier than the usual smell of the stack, a concentrated essence of the bog, and you breathe it in slowly, letting it fill your senses. You fit the 2 halves back together as best you can and place them on top of the stack, where they will dry further and be the first to go into the kiln when the fire needs feeding. The fourth and final block is whole and undamaged, though it has rolled a little way from the stack and come to rest in a clump of dock leaves. You retrieve it, brushing away a small spider that has spun a web between the dock stems overnight. The spider drops onto the grass and scurries away into the shadows at the base of the wall. The block is dry and light, and you set it back into its place with a single, easy motion, pressing it home until the outer face of the stack is once again smooth and unbroken. Then you gather the scattered crumbs and fragments, scooping them into your palm, and you carry them to the small iron bucket that sits beside the stack for this purpose. The fragments will not be wasted. They will go into the kiln alongside the whole blocks, burning just as steadily and cleanly. With the stack restored, you remain kneeling for a while longer, one hand resting on the cool, firm surface of the peat. The blocks feel solid and reassuring under your palm, and you let your gaze travel along the length of the stack, following the alternating courses, the play of light and shadow across the textured surfaces. A few small spiders have built their webs in the deeper crevices, and the silk catches the sunlight in faint, silvery threads that tremble in the breeze. An ant makes its way along the top course, navigating the rough terrain with a patience that matches your own, and you watch it until it disappears over the far side. You push yourself to your feet, your knees leaving 2 damp impressions in the grass, and you walk around the stack to the side that faces the open moor. From here, the ground rises steadily toward the dark, distant line where the peat cutting takes place, a stripe of black against the green and brown of the hill. The cutting ground is invisible from the glen, hidden by the shoulder of the hill, but you know it well, the long trenches where the spade cuts down through the living sphagnum into the dark, compressed layers beneath. The peat you are handling now was cut in early June, when the days were long and the ground was dry enough to walk on without sinking. You remember the rhythm of the cutting, the way the spade sliced down with a wet, sucking sound, the way the blocks were laid out to dry in the sun, and the wind for weeks before they could be stacked. The thought of the cutting ground passes through your mind without settling, a brief flicker of memory that rises and fades, and you turn your attention back to the stack before you. A wren has appeared on the dry stone wall, its small brown body perched on the topmost stone, its tail cocked upward at a jaunty angle. It watches you with one bright, dark eye, its head turning in quick, mechanical jerks, and then it drops down into the grass at the base of the wall and begins to forage, hopping from one spot to the next with a busy, purposeful energy. You watch it for a time, noting how it pauses after each hop to listen, its whole body still except for the constant flick of its wings. The wren finds something small among the grass roots, a seed or an insect too tiny to see, and it flies up onto the wall again and disappears into a crevice between the stones. You walk to the wall and rest your forearms on its rough top, looking out across the glen. The slope falls away below you in a patchwork of greens, the deep emerald of the rush beds by the burn, the paler green of the sheep-cropped turf, the dark bluish green of the heather on the higher ground. The burn itself is a silver ribbon winding through the center of the scene, its surface catching the sunlight in scattered, shifting points of brightness. The still house sits quiet and small by the water's edge, its roof dark against the green, and beyond it, the malt barn sends up its thin, steady thread of smoke, which rises straight for a little way and then bends gently eastward. The whole glen seems to breathe in the afternoon light, a slow, deep exhalation of warmth and peace. You push away from the wall and return to the peat stack, where you spend a few more unhurried minutes inspecting the inner courses. The stack is deeper than it is tall, and the blocks in the center, protected from sun and wind, remain damp and heavy, exactly as they should. You pull one of these inner blocks partway out, feeling its cool weight, and you run your thumb over its surface. The peat here is dense and smooth, almost waxy to the touch, with a sheen of moisture that makes it look darker than the outer blocks. This is the best peat for the kiln, the peat that will smolder long and slow, giving up its heat and its smoke in a steady, controlled release. You push the block back into place and brush the dark dust from your hands onto your trousers. The sun moves imperceptibly across the sky, and the shadow of the malt barn begins to stretch a little way across the grass. You settle onto the ground near the stack, your back against the warm stones of the wall, and you stretch your legs out in front of you. The grass here is long and soft, dotted with the small white flowers of chickweed and the tiny purple trumpets of self-heal. A honeybee drones past, its flight path a lazy curve, and you follow it with your eyes until it vanishes into the wind bushes. The warmth of the afternoon, the solid presence of the peat stack, the distant murmur of the burn, all of these things combine into a single, seamless feeling of quietude that settles over you like a second blanket. Your eyes grow heavy, not with sleep, but with a kind of deep, resting awareness. You let them close for a little while, and the sounds of the glen become clearer in the darkness. The buzzard mewing far off, the bleat of a sheep on the high ground, the faint rustle of the wren as it returns to the wall and begins its foraging again. The scent of the peat is all around you, and you breathe it in with each slow, regular breath. After a time you open your eyes again, and the glen is still there, unchanged, the peat stack still dark and solid beside you, the sky still pale and clear above. You remain where you are for a while longer, your body at rest, your mind as still as the water in the worm tub, and then at last you stir, ready to return to the still house and the tasks that wait there. You leave the peat stack and the dry stone wall, and the wren to their afternoon quiet, and you walk back across the yard toward the still house. The sun has passed its highest point and begun the long, slow slide toward the western ridge, and the light has taken on a softer quality, the sharp edges of the morning smoothed away. Your shadow stretches beside you on the packed earth, a dark companion that matches your pace exactly. The burn's voice is steady and familiar, and the thread of smoke from the malt barn still rises straight and pale, undisturbed by any wind. You reach the still house door and take the iron key from your pocket, its weight now warm from your body, and you let yourself inside. The cool air of the still house wraps around you once more, and you close the door gently, leaving only a sliver of daylight at the jamb. The high window still admits its shaft of light, weaker now and shifted further across the floor, touching the far wall, where the shelf holds the oil lamp and the small wooden box. You walk to the shelf and lift the lamp, tilting it to check the oil level, and finding it sufficient, you set it back. Then you take down the wooden box, cradling it in both hands, and you carry it to the low bench near the spirit safe where the light is best. The box is made of pine, its lid worn smooth at the corners, its brass hinges dark with age. You set it on the bench beside you and lift the lid, which opens with a small dry creak. Inside, arranged in neat compartments, are the tools of your quiet seasoned labor, several soft rags of worn linen, a small earthenware pot containing a paste of chalk and water mixed to the consistency of thick cream, a stiff brush with bristles of horsehair, a tiny wooden spatula, and nestled in the largest compartment, a collection of brass fittings. These are the valves, cocks, and connection collars that you removed from the spirit safe at the end of the last distilling season, each one tagged with a scrap of linen and numbered in your own small, careful script. You lift the first piece from the box and hold it in your palm. It is a small brass stopcock, a simple cylinder with a tapered plug that turns within its housing, the handle a flat lozenge shape worn smooth by countless adjustments. The brass is tarnished to a dull, dark brown, almost black in the crevices where the metal meets itself, and there is a thin film of dried oil and spirit residue that has hardened over the months of idleness. The piece is cool and solid, heavier than it looks, and you turn it over slowly in your hand, examining every face, every angle, every threaded port. You set the stopcock on the bench and reach into the box for the earthenware pot. The lid comes off with a slight twist, and the smell of the chalk paste rises, clean and mineral, like wet stone after rain. You dip the small wooden spatula into the paste and lift out a dab roughly the size of a hazelnut, which you transfer to a corner of one of the linen rags. Then you pick up the stopcock again and begin. The rag, now carrying its small burden of paste, touches the tarnished brass with the lightest pressure. You work the paste into the metal with tiny circular motions, the movement originating not in your wrist but in your whole forearm, so that it becomes a steady, rhythmic rotation. The paste is slightly gritty under the cloth, and as you rub, it begins to darken, lifting the tarnish from the brass and carrying it away into the fibers of the rag. You turn the stopcock over and work the other side, then the narrow edges, then the threaded ports where the connecting pipes will one day be screwed back in. Each surface receives the same slow, patient circles, the same careful attention. After a time, you pause and wipe the piece clean with a dry corner of the rag. The transformation is quiet but unmistakable. Where the brass was dull and brown, it now gleams with a deep golden luster, the light from the high window catching its curves and throwing a warm reflection onto the stone wall. You hold the stopcock up and turn it in the light, checking for any spots you have missed. There is a small patch near the base of the plug where the tarnish still clings, a stubborn shadow shaped like a crescent moon, and you take up the paste again and work this spot with the very tip of your finger, feeling the faint abrasion, the slow yielding of the discoloration. When you wipe it clean a second time, the brass is uniform and bright, restored to the color of pale honey. You set the finished stopcock on the bench beside the box, where it glows softly against the dark wood, and you reach for the next piece. This one is a connection collar, a short, thick tube of brass with internal threads at both ends. It is larger than the stopcock and heavier, and the tarnish here has taken on a slightly greenish cast near the threads, a sign of the copper in the brass, reacting over time with the faint moisture that lingers in the spirit safe. You dip the spatula into the paste again and apply a fresh dab to the rag, and you begin the same circular motion, working first around the outer circumference, then into the interior where the threads spiral inward in a precise mechanical pattern. The threads require a different approach. You wrap a corner of the rag around the tip of your little finger, and insert it into the collar, turning the piece rather than your hand, so that the paste is worked evenly into each groove. The motion is slower here, more deliberate, and you feel each ridge and valley of the threading through the cloth. The paste turns grey as it lifts the tarnish from the hidden places, and you withdraw your finger and wipe the interior clean. Then repeat the process with a fresh bit of paste until the rag comes away almost white. The daylight continues its slow migration across the floor, the beam from the high window now touching the base of the worm tub and beginning to climb its dark wooden side. You work on, piece by piece, the small collection of brass fittings diminishing on one side of the box and growing on the other, a neat row of gleaming golden objects that seem almost to emit their own light. A valve handle shaped like a small wheel, its spokes delicate and precise. A threaded cap with a knurled edge that grips your fingertips. A tiny inspection port cover, no bigger than a thumbnail, its surface curved to fit the body of the spirit safe. Each piece receives the same unhurried attention. You do not count them, and you do not hurry through them. The rhythm of the polishing has become its own world, a quiet enclosed space where only the cloth and the paste and the brass exist. The sound of the work is a soft, continuous whisper, the rub of linen on metal, punctuated occasionally by the small click of a finished piece being set down on the bench. Outside, the burn runs on, and far away, a raven croaks once from the high crags. But these sounds belong to another place, a place you have temporarily left. After the last of the threaded collars is finished, you set down the rag and stretch your fingers, which have grown stiff from the close work. You flex them slowly, feeling the joints pop in small, satisfying releases, and then you pick up the horsehair brush. The brush is for the larger pieces, the fittings with deeper recesses, where the rag cannot easily reach. You take up the largest of the connection collars and dip the brush into the paste, working the bristles into the interior threads with a back and forth motion that sends a fine, pale dust drifting down onto the bench. The brush reaches into the deepest grooves, scrubbing away the tarnish that has gathered there since the last quiet season. When you wipe the collar clean with a fresh rag, the threads shine as brightly as the outer surface, and you set it aside with the others. The light from the window has grown noticeably dimmer, the shaft now a pale, diffuse glow rather than the sharp column of the morning. You look up from your work and notice the change, the way the shadows have reclaimed the corners of the still house, and the gleam of the polished brass on the bench has become more pronounced against the gathering dusk. You have been working for longer than you realized, the hours passing unnoticed in the rhythm of the polishing. You set down the brush and rise from the bench, your back stretching with a slow, pleasant ache, and you walk to the door and open it a crack. The yard outside is bathed in the golden light of late afternoon, the shadows long and blue, the burn still singing its constant song. The smoke from the malt barn has thinned further, barely visible now against the pale sky, and you know that the peat fire has burned down to its deep bed of embers and will soon need a fresh block or two. But that is a task for later, for the evening round. For now you close the door and return to the bench, where the remaining fittings wait in their wooden compartments. You take up the final piece, a small intricate valve with a delicate adjustment screw and a tapered seat that must be perfectly smooth to hold its seal. This piece has always been your favorite, the one that requires the most care. The tarnish here is minimal, just a faint dulling of the surface, and you apply only the smallest dab of paste, working it in with the barest pressure. The screw turns freely under your fingers, its threads clean and bright, and the tapered seat gleams with a mirror-like finish when you hold it up to the window's fading light. You wipe it clean and set it with the others, the row of polished fittings now complete. The bench before you glows with the soft golden shine of restored brass, a warm constellation of small precise objects that represent hours of patient attention. You look at them for a long moment, the way the light plays across their surfaces, the way each piece reflects a tiny distorted image of the still house around it. Then you reach for the clean linen cloth that you keep folded in the bottom of the box, and you begin to wrap each piece individually, tucking the cloth around the stopcocks and the collars and the valves, protecting their bright surfaces from the air until the distilling season comes again, and they are returned to their places in the spirit safe. When all the pieces are wrapped, you nestle them back into the compartments of the wooden box, fitting them together so they do not rattle or shift. You close the lid and press it down gently, feeling the soft resistance of the contents, and then you carry the box back to the shelf and set it in its accustomed place beside the oil lamp. The shelf still holds the faint, clean scent of the chalk paste, and you pause there for a moment, one hand resting on the box, your eyes moving across the quiet shapes of the stillhouse. The great copper pot, the worm tub with its lid secure, the spirit safe waiting for its fittings, the high window where the last of the daylight is fading. All of it rests in perfect stillness, and you rest with it, your breathing slow and deep, before you turn to the door and the evening tasks that wait outside. You close the stillhouse door on the gleaming brass and the settling shadows, and you turn toward the sound of the burn. The afternoon has softened into a mellow golden hour, the sun now low enough to throw long shafts of light across the yard and to set the western faces of the stones aglow. The air is cooler than it was at midday, and it carries a freshness that rises from the water, a cool, clean breath that seems to flow downhill alongside the burn itself. You walk across the yard, past the corner of the malt barn where the smoke still rises in its thin, patient thread, and you follow the narrow path that leads downstream toward the sluice. The path descends gently, hugging the contour of the hill as it follows the burn's course. The grass here is longer and lusher, fed by the constant moisture of the water, and it brushes against your boots with a soft, sighing sound. Docks and flag irises grow in thick clumps along the bank, their broad leaves dark green and glossy, and among them the first pale blooms of meadowsweet are beginning to open, their scent faint and sweet on the cooling air. You walk slowly, your pace matching the easy flow of the water beside you, and you let your gaze travel along the burned surface, watching the way it wrinkles and smooths, the way it catches the low sunlight and breaks it into countless shifting fragments. The burn is not a single, uniform stream. It has moods and variations along its length. Here, where the path first meets its edge, the water runs shallow over a bed of small, rounded stones, each one visible through the clear flow, their colors ranging from pale gray to deep russet to a dark, almost black basalt. The water makes a light, musical sound in this stretch, a bright, tinkling note that overlays the deeper hum of the main current. You pause to watch a small whirlpool form behind a larger stone, the water spinning in a tight, continuous circle, and then you move on, following the path as it curves around a clump of alder trees whose roots reach down into the water like gnarled fingers. The alders give way to a more open stretch of bank, and here you come to the sluice. It is a simple structure, a low wooden gate set into a narrow channel that branches off from the main burn and runs straight as a rule toward the stillhouse. The channel, which you call the lade, is lined with flat stones along its bottom and sides, and the water that flows through it is the same water that feeds the worm tub and the washback and every other vessel in the distillery that requires cold, clean flow. The sluice gate itself is made of heavy oak planks, darkened by years of immersion to a deep, rich brown, and it is raised and lowered by a long iron handle that rises from a screw mechanism set into a stone pillar. You step onto the flat stone at the edge of the sluice and look down into the lade. The water here is deeper and slower than in the main burn, moving with a deliberate, glassy smoothness that barely disturbs the surface. Small water weeds wave gently from the stone lining, their fronds pale green and translucent, and a few caddisfly larvae have built their tiny tube-like cases on the underside of the wooden gate, each one a mosaic of sand grains and tiny shell fragments. You kneel on the stone and lean forward, your hands resting on your thighs, and you study the water level with the careful attention of long practice. The level has dropped slightly over the past week of dry weather, perhaps by the width of 2 fingers. The stones near the top of the lade's wall show a pale, dry band where the water usually reaches but does not now, and the flow into the pipe that serves the worm tub seems just a fraction less vigorous than it should be. This is not a crisis, nothing that demands haste or worry, but it is a fact that must be addressed. And you address it now with the same patient method you bring to every task in the glen. You rise and take hold of the iron handle, feeling its cool, rough surface against your palms. The screw mechanism turns with a low, groaning sound. The threads dry and in need of the oil. You will bring another day. You turn the handle slowly, a quarter turn at a time, and with each quarter turn, the heavy oak gate rises a fraction of an inch. The water responds immediately, the flow into the lade quickening, the surface developing a faint, curved ripple where it passes under the gate. You watch the level begin to rise, the pale dry band on the stones narrowing and then disappearing as the water reclaims its usual height. You give the handle one more small adjustment, barely a nudge, and then you step back and let the flow settle. The sound of the water has changed subtly with the adjustment, the note deepening as more of the burn's volume is diverted into the lade. You listen to it for a moment, attuning your ear to the new balance, and then you walk a few paces downstream to where the lade passes under a small stone arch and enters the pipe that leads to the stillhouse. Here at the mouth of the pipe, the water makes a soft gulping sound as it enters the dark tunnel, and you can feel the faint vibration of the flow through the soles of your boots. The pipe is running full now, the water cold and clear and plenty, and you make a mental note to check the worm tub again before nightfall, though you already know what you will find: the coil still submerged, the temperature still cold, the water still exactly as it should be. You leave the sluice and wander further downstream along the bank of the main burn, drawn by the simple pleasure of the water's company. The ground here is less tended, the path fading into a deer track that winds among stands of bracken and the occasional silver birch whose leaves flicker in the breeze. The burn widens slightly, and its voice grows deeper, the bright tinkling of the shallows giving way to a fuller, more resonant note as the water slides over ledges of smooth rock. You find a spot where the bank flattens into a natural seat, the grass worn down by your own previous visits, and you lower yourself onto it, your back against the worn trunk of an old rowan tree. From here, you can see a long stretch of the burn as it curves away toward the dark line of the glen's mouth. The water divides around a large, central boulder that must have rolled down from the crags centuries ago, its surface worn smooth and painted with patches of pale grey lichen. The two streams rejoin on the far side in the gentle collision of ripples that spreads downstream in a perpetual, overlapping pattern. The rowan tree above you rustles softly, its leaves are dark green on top and silver underneath, and the clusters of red berries that will feed the thrushes in autumn are small and hard and green still, waiting for their season. You settle into the seat and let your breathing slow. The burn sound fills your ears completely, not as a single noise, but as a rich, layered chord made of many different notes. The high liquid trill of the water over the shallows, the deeper rush of the main current, the occasional soft plosh of a small fish rising to take an insect from the surface. These sounds blend into a constant flowing hush that seems to wash through your mind as the water washes over the stones, and you let it carry away the small, scattered thoughts that have accumulated over the course of the day. Your gaze rests on the surface of the burn, which reflects the upside-down image of the rowan tree, and the pale sky and the dark shape of the hillside behind you. The reflection is not perfect. The current breaks it into shifting, abstract forms that constantly reform and dissolve, a slow liquid painting that never repeats itself. A water strider skates across the surface on its long, delicate legs, leaving small dimples that spread in perfect circles and then vanish. You watch the insect for a long time, its movements seemingly random yet purposeful, and when it finally darts away to the shelter of the bank, the water closes over its passage and becomes smooth again. You lean forward and dip your hand into the burn, submerging it to the wrist. The water is colder than the air, cold enough to make your skin tingle, and you hold it there, feeling the current press against your fingers, feeling the small invisible particles of silt brush past your palm. The water here comes directly from the spring you visited in the morning, and you can taste its mineral cleanness in the air. The same ancient stony freshness. You withdraw your hand and shake the drops from your fingers, and you lean back against the rowan trunk, your hand resting cool and damp on your knee. The light continues to change as the sun sinks lower, the golden tones deepening to amber, the shadows growing longer and softer. The hillsides across the burn are lit now on their western faces, the heather glowing a warm, reddish-brown, while the eastern faces have fallen into a cool, blue-grey shadow. A few midges dance in a column above the water, their tiny bodies catching the light like drifting sparks, and a swallow swoops through them once, twice, and then veers away up the glen. You watch the swallow until it is only a speck against the pale sky, and then you close your eyes and let the burn's voice fill the darkness. The sound is different with your eyes closed, more immediate and immersive, as if the water were flowing not beside you, but through you. You can distinguish the individual notes more clearly now, the low, steady drum of the deeper pools, the bright, rippling arpeggios of the shallows, the occasional percussive plink of a pebble shifting in the current. These sounds have no melody, no pattern, and yet they form a kind of music that is older and more fundamental than any human composition, the music of water moving over stone, the same music that has played in this glen since the ice melted and the first stream began to flow. Time passes without measure. When you open your eyes again, the light has shifted further, the amber tones deepening toward the first hint of sunset. The air has cooled noticeably, and a thin veil of mist is beginning to form above the water, a pale, ghostly layer that hovers just above the surface and moves with the current. The mist catches the last direct light of the sun and glows faintly, a soft, luminous band that follows the burn's curves like a second, more ethereal stream flowing just above the first. You know that it is time to rise, time to check the kiln and the still house and the worm tub, one last time before the night settles fully into the glen. But you do not rise yet. You linger for a few more breaths, letting the mist and the sound and the cooling air hold you in their gentle suspension. The burn flows on, indifferent and eternal, and you are simply another part of the glen, another shape in the gathering dusk, as still and patient as the stones that line the water's edge. You rise from the bank of the burn when the mist begins to thicken and the last direct light fades from the water's surface. The rowan tree stands dark and silent behind you, and the path back toward the yard is already deepening into shadow. You walk slowly, your boots finding the deer track by habit rather than sight, and the sound of the burn recedes behind you, its layered voice gradually replaced by the closer rustle of bracken and the occasional soft call of a wood pigeon settling for the night. The air is cool and damp, and it carries the scent of the peat smoke from the kiln, still steady, still faint, the one constant that links every hour of this quiet day. You pass the sluice gate, pausing only long enough to note that the water level in the lade remains full, the flow smooth and silent, and then you continue on toward the still house. But you do not enter the still house now. Instead, you turn aside before you reach the yard, taking a narrow, sloping path that branches off and descends between two low rises where the wind bushes grow thick on either side. The path is stony and uneven, and you place your feet with care, your hands occasionally brushing the yellow blossoms that have closed now against the evening cool. The coconut scent of the wind is fainter at this hour, softer, mingling with the earthier smell of damp soil and the clean, sharp note of the coming night. The bonted warehouse sits at the bottom of this slope, a low building of stone that hunkers against the hillside as if seeking its warmth. It is older than the still house, older perhaps than the malt barn, its walls thick and its roof a deep cap of grey slate that has weathered to a mottled, silvery sheen. The building has no windows, only a single heavy door of oak bound with iron straps, and above the door a small ventilation slit cross-hatched with iron bars. The door faces away from the prevailing wind, and the ground before it is bare earth packed hard by years of cask rolling and the passage of boots. You approach slowly, the weight of the day settling into your limbs, and you take the key that hangs from an iron hook beside the door, a key larger and heavier than the still house key, its shaft thick and its bow worn to a smooth, dark patina. The lock turns with a deep, solemn clunk, and the door swings outward on hinges that have been kept well oiled and move in silence. The air that meets you as you step inside is entirely different from the air outside, distinct from the fresh damp of the glen, distinct even from the warm, peaty atmosphere of the malt barn or the cool, metallic stillness of the still house. This air is cool but not cold, still but not stagnant, and it is saturated with a rich, complex fragrance that has no single source. It is the scent of oak and thyme, of spirit slowly breathing through wood, of stone that has held the same temperature for a century, of the faint, sweet, almost vanilla-like note of the whiskey itself as it matures in the darkness. You stand just inside the door and breathe it in, letting the scent fill your lungs and settle into your senses. The interior of the warehouse is a single, long chamber with a high-vaulted ceiling supported by rough-hewn beams of oak. The floor is flagged with large, uneven stones, and they are cool under your boots, worn smooth down the center where the walkway runs. On either side of this central aisle, the casks are arranged in rows, stacked 2 or 3 high on heavy wooden gantries that keep them clear of the floor. The casks themselves are of varying sizes, Some are butts, tall and broad, holding 500 gallons. Some are hogsheads, smaller and squatter. A few are smaller still, quarter casks and octaves that you use for special parcels of spirit. All of them are made of oak, their staves darkened to a deep, rich brown, bound with iron hoops that have dulled to a dark, almost black patina. You begin your slow walk down the central aisle. The only light comes from the open door behind you, a dim, slanting shaft that illuminates the first few rows and then fades into deepening shadow. You have brought no lamp, because you do not need one. You know this space by touch and smell and memory, and the counting you do here is not a matter of numbers on a page, but a physical, sensory inventory that you conduct with your hands and your ears and your attentive presence. The first cask on your left is a butt, its head facing the aisle, its bung sitting securely in the central hole. You stop before it and reach out your hand, laying your palm flat against the head. The wood is cool and smooth under your touch, the grain tight and even, and there is a faint, almost imperceptible tackiness at the surface, the first sign of the angel's share beginning to seep through the pores of the oak. This is a good sign, a sign that the cask is breathing, that the spirit inside is slowly concentrating and mellowing, losing a little volume to the air but gaining in depth and character. You press your thumb firmly against the bung, a simple wooden plug wrapped in a strip of linen, and it does not yield. It sits tight and secure, exactly as it should. You move to the next cask, another butt, and repeat the same motion, hand to the head, feeling the cool wood, the slight tackiness, the firm bung. Then the next and the next. Each cask receives the same brief, careful attention, and each one tells you the same quiet story. Everything is as it should be, the spirit sleeping undisturbed, the wood doing its slow, patient work. Your footsteps echo softly in the high space, a muted, rhythmic sound that seems to belong to the warehouse as much as the scent of the oak. After the first row of butts, you come to a stack of hogsheads, smaller and rounder, their iron hoops showing faint traces of rust where the damp air has worked over the years. You trail your fingers over the nearest hoop, feeling the cool, slightly roughened metal, the rivets that hold the hoop closed, the slight bulge of the staves beneath. The iron is cold, colder than the wood, and your fingers come away smelling faintly of metal and old oak. You press the bung of the topmost hogshead, then the one below, then the one resting on the floor, and each bung is tight, each cask sound. You pause in the center of the aisle and listen. The silence in the warehouse is not a simple absence of sound, but a positive presence, a deep, layered quiet that seems almost solid. It is the silence of decades, of stone and oak and spirit resting together in the dark. You hold your breath for a moment and strain your ears, listening for any faint hiss that might indicate a leak. There is none. There is only the profound, enveloping stillness, and then, just at the edge of hearing, a soft, scurrying sound from the roof beams above. A mouse, perhaps, or a small bird that has found its way through the ventilation slit. The sound is brief and complete, and when it stops, the silence returns even deeper than before. You continue your walk along the rows, passing the quarter casks that rest on a low shelf near the back wall. These casks are smaller, easier to handle, and you crouch to inspect them more closely. The staves here are thinner, the hoops more delicate, and the spirit inside ages a little faster because the ratio of wood to liquid is higher. You run your hand over the curved side of one of these quarter casks, feeling the way the heat of your palm momentarily warms the oak, releasing a faint, sweet, almost floral note from the wood. The bung on this cask is a small, tapered plug, and you press it in with your thumb, testing its seal. It holds firm. You rise and move on, your fingers now trailing along the iron hoops of the casks as you pass them. The hoops are different sizes, different textures, some smooth and cold, others slightly pitted with age. Your fingertips read them like a blind man reading text, registering each small variation without judgment. The counting is not a tally. It is a communion, a slow acknowledgement of each cask's presence, each cask's history. Some of these casks have been here for years, their spirit darkening and deepening, while others are newer, filled only last season and still pale and sharp. All of them are part of the same slow process, the same patient waiting that defines the quiet season. Near the far end of the warehouse, you come to a row of casks that have been chalk-marked with small white numbers. These are the casks that will be emptied first when the next season begins, their spirit ready for the spirit safe and the worm tub and the final proofing. The chalk marks are faint now, half rubbed away by the passage of months, and you read them slowly, the numbers forming a sequence that you hold in your mind for a moment and then release. You press your hand against the head of the first chalk-marked butt and feel a slightly greater tackiness here. The angels share a little more pronounced. This is normal for an older cask, and you note it without concern. You reach the far wall and turn, facing back down the long aisle toward the door. From this angle, the light from the open door is a dim, distant rectangle, and the casks on either side recede in shadowy ranks. The shapes are massive and dark, their outlines only suggested, and the air is thick with the scent of whiskey and oak. You stand there for a long moment, breathing the cool, still air, feeling the weight of the warehouse around you. The mouse scurries again overhead, a tiny, rapid patter that crosses the beam and then stops, and you listen to the silence that follows. You begin your walk back down the aisle, this time along the opposite side, where the casks have not yet been inspected. The routine is the same, hand on the head, thumb on the bung, fingers trailing over the hoops, but you do not hurry. Each cask receives the same calm attention, the same quiet acknowledgement. The row includes a few casks that are slightly different in character, their oak having come from a different cooperage, their hoops painted with a faint trace of dark blue paint that has flaked away in patches. You pause at one of these and run your palm over the painted iron, feeling the rough, uneven texture of the flaking paint. The cask is sound, the bung tight, the wood cool. After a time, you arrive back at the door, where the last of the evening light still falls in a pale, slanted shaft. You turn and look back into the darkness of the warehouse, your eyes tracing the rows you have just walked. The counting is complete, not in the sense of a number recorded, but in the sense of a duty fulfilled, a connection maintained. You know that every cask is whole, every bung secure, every spirit sleeping as it should. The warehouse holds its contents in perfect stillness, and you feel a quiet satisfaction settle into your chest, a satisfaction that is indistinguishable from the general peace of the evening. You step outside and pull the heavy door closed, the iron hinges moving in silence. The key turns in the lock with the same deep, solid clunk, and you hang it back on its hook, where it will wait until your next visit. The sky above the glen has darkened further, the pale blue of the afternoon giving way to a deeper violet hue, and the first few stars are just beginning to appear above the eastern ridge. The air is cool and fresh after the enclosed atmosphere of the warehouse, and you stand for a moment beside the door, one hand resting on the rough stone of the wall, letting the outside world re-establish itself around you. The wind bushes on either side of the path have closed their blossoms entirely now, their green, thorny branches dark against the fading light. You begin the slow climb back up toward the yard, your legs feeling the slight burn of the slope, your breath coming slow and even. The path rises before you, and at the top, the still house and the malt barn wait, their familiar shapes solid and reassuring. The smoke from the kiln is still rising, a faint pale column against the darkening sky, and the light from the still-house window, where you lit the lamp earlier, glimmers dimly through the thick glass. You walk toward it, your day not yet quite over, the worm tub still to check and the kiln fire still to feed, but you carry with you the quiet peace of the warehouse, the scent of oak and thyme, the deep silence of sleeping casks. You leave the warehouse door secured and the key hanging on its iron hook, and you begin the slow climb back up the slope toward the yard. The path is darker now, the wind bushes on either side having faded from green to black silhouettes, and you place your feet with the care of a man who knows every stone and hollow. The sky above the glen has deepened to a rich, violet grey, and the stars that first appeared above the eastern ridge have multiplied, a scattering of pale points that grow brighter as the daylight recedes. The air is cool and still, carrying the last faint sweetness of the wind blossoms and the ever-present thread of peat smoke that tells you the kiln fire still breathes. You reach the top of the slope and cross the yard, passing the still house where the oil lamp glimmers dimly through the thick glass of the high window. You pause there for a moment, your hand on the cool stone of the wall, and you listen. The burn still runs, the water still flows through the worm tub, and everything within the still house rests exactly as you left it. Then you push away from the wall and continue on toward the malt barn, where the smoke rises pale and thin against the darkening sky, and where the kiln fire will soon need its evening feeding. The door of the malt barn stands as you left it, partway open, the warm golden-brown glow of the interior spilling out onto the grass. You step inside and the heat wraps around you at once, but it is a different heat now from the deep, steady warmth of the afternoon. The fire has burned down, and the air in the barn, while still warm, has lost some of its intensity. The malt bed still stretches across the perforated floor, its color now a deeper gold, the grains visibly drier, and the smoke that rises through the plates is thinner, paler, barely a haze. The kiln fire needs attention, and you are here to give it. You remove your boots at the door, as you did before, and you walk in your stocking feet across the warm iron plates toward the small iron hatch set into the wall. The plates are not as hot as they were earlier, and the warmth through your soles is gentle rather than insistent. You reach the hatch and lift the latch, which is no longer hot to the touch but merely warm, and you swing the small door inward and bend low to look into the kiln pit below. The fire has indeed burned down. The dome of embers that glowed so steadily in the morning has collapsed into a flat dark bed, and only a few patches of deep red still pulse among the white ash. The embers are not dead, not yet, but they are fading, and if left too long without fresh fuel, they will cool beyond recall, and the drying floor will lose its heat. This is a common thing, an expected thing, a thing you have managed 1,000 times before, and you straighten from the hatch without haste and walk to the corner of the barn where the day's supply of peat blocks is stacked against the wall. The peat here is dry and light, having rested indoors for several days, and you select 2 blocks from the stack, one in each hand. They are roughly the size of small loaves, their surfaces dark and fibrous, their edges crisp where the cutting spade sliced through. You carry them back to the hatch and set them on the floor beside you, and then you reach for the long iron tongs that hang from a hook beside the opening. The tongs are heavy and blackened with years of use, their gripping ends flattened into broad, serrated pads, and you take them up and test their action, opening and closing the handles once to feel the smooth, solid bite of the metal. You lift the first block of peat with the tongs, gripping it firmly around its middle, and you lower it through the open hatch into the kiln pit. The block descends slowly, your arm steady, and you place it carefully onto the bed of embers, positioning it so that it rests at the edge of the glowing patch. The peat touches the embers, and for a moment nothing happens, and then a thin, curling thread of smoke begins to rise from its underside, pale and hesitant, almost like a living thing testing the air. You watch the smoke for a few breaths, noting how it lies almost horizontal in the still air under the drying floor, and then you lift the second block with the tongs and lower it into place beside the first. This second block settles onto a hotter spot, and it catches more quickly. The smoke thickens at once, a soft grey-white plume that rises through the perforated plates and spreads across the underside of the drying floor. You withdraw the tongs and hang them back on their hook, and then you crouch at the hatch and watch the new peat begin to burn. The smoke grows denser for a time, obscuring the embers, and then, with a soft, almost silent whomp, the first small flame appears. It is a pale orange at first, almost transparent, licking at the edge of the peat block with a quick, flickering motion. Then it steadies and deepens, and a second flame joins it, and soon the 2 blocks are crowned with a low, steady fire that reaches upward toward the iron plates above. You close the hatch gently, leaving just a sliver of opening for the draught, and you stand and step back onto the drying floor. The effect of the new fuel is already palpable. The heat rising through the plates has intensified, a fresh wave of warmth that you can feel on your face and hands, and the smoke that curls up through the holes is thicker now, a pale blue-grey that carries the full, earthy scent of the peat. The malt bed seems to stir slightly under the increased heat, the grains settling with a faint, rustling sigh, and you walk slowly around the perimeter of the floor, checking that the warmth is distributed evenly and that no cold spots remain. At the far end of the barn, near the door, you have left a long wooden paddle leaning against the wall. This paddle is different from the shield, broader and flatter, with a smooth, untoothed blade that you use for the final stages of the drying, when the malt is too fragile to be turned roughly. You take it up now and walk back to the center of the floor, where you stand and look out across the bed of grain. The malt has darkened noticeably since your last visit, the pale gold of the afternoon deepening to a richer, warmer amber, and the scent that rises from it is sweeter now. Less biscuity, more like toasted bread or warm honey. You lower the blade of the paddle and slide it gently under the surface of the malt, lifting a small section and turning it over with a slow, fluid motion. The grains flow across the wood and fall back onto the bed in a soft, even layer, and you repeat the motion a few feet further on, working your way slowly across the floor. The paddle is quiet in your hands, making only the softest shushing sound as it moves through the grain, and the rhythm of the work is soothing. A slow, deliberate dance that you have performed so many times that your body knows it without thought. The light from the small windows under the eaves has faded almost entirely now, and the interior of the barn is lit only by the glow that rises through the perforated plates. This glow is a deep, warm amber, the color of the embers and the fire below, and it suffuses the space with a soft, shadowless illumination that makes the malt bed seem to float on a sea of light. The smoke is thickest near the roof, a pale, drifting layer that moves slowly toward the ridge vent, and the air is warm and still and fragrant with the mingled scents of peat and grain. You continue your slow circuit of the floor, the paddle moving in its quiet rhythm, turning the malt with a care that borders on gentleness. The grain is nearly dry now, the moisture content dropping to the level where it can be stored safely until the miller comes. You can feel the difference in the way the kernels move under the paddle, lighter and freer, no longer clumping together, but flowing individually, each grain separate and distinct. This is the goal of the drying, this slow transformation from green living barley to pale stable malt, and you have been its careful attendant through every stage. When the last section of the bed has been turned, you carry the paddle back to its place against the wall and return to the center of the floor. You stand there for a long moment, your hands resting at your sides, your face warmed by the heat rising from below. The embers in the kiln pit are burning steadily now, the new peat fully caught, and the fire will hold through the night without further attention. The malt will continue its slow drying in the steady warmth, and by morning it will be a shade closer to readiness. You walk to the door and sit on the low wooden bench to put on your boots as you did before. The leather is warm from the barn's heat, and it slides onto your feet with a familiar, comforting snugness. You lace them slowly, your fingers moving in the dim light by touch and habit, and then you rise and step toward the open door. The cool air from outside meets you at the threshold, and you pause there, one hand on the doorframe, looking back into the barn. The fire glows beneath the floor, a soft, steady radiance that fills the long, low space with amber light. The smoke drifts upward in pale, lazy spirals, and the malt bed stretches from wall to wall in its even golden carpet. The silence in the barn is complete, except for the faint, almost inaudible whisper of the fire drawing air through the hatch. The scene is one of absolute, suspended peace, a single moment of perfect stillness in a glen that has known such moments for centuries. You step outside and pull the door partway closed, leaving a gap for the smoke to escape and the fire to breathe. The night air is cool and clean, and the sky above the glen is now fully dark, crowded with stars that spread from ridge to ridge in a great, silent arc. The burn's voice rises from the darkness, constant and soothing, and the shapes of the still house and the malt barn and the distant hills are only deeper shadows against the starfield. You stand in the yard for a moment, your breath visible as a faint mist, and then you turn toward the still house for the final round of the day, the worm tub still waiting to be checked, the stillness of the night still gathering around you like a second blanket. You pull the malt barn door to its familiar resting place, leaving the gap for the smoke to drift out into the night, and you turn toward the still house. The yard is pulled in darkness now, the only light a faint, warm glow from the high window where the oil lamp still burns. Your boots find the packed earth by memory, and you walk slowly, your breath rising in soft, pale puffs that vanish almost at once. The burn sings its constant low song from the shadows beyond the wall, and the stars above the glen have thickened into a dense, silent river of light that arcs from ridge to ridge. You reach the still house door and take the key from your pocket, its metal warm from your body, and you let yourself inside one final time for the night. The still house receives you with its cool, still air and the faint scent of copper and damp stone. The oil lamp on its shelf has burned steadily through the hours of your absence, and its small flame still draws a perfect yellow teardrop shape behind the sooted glass. You lift the lamp by its wire handle and carry it to the worm tub, setting it on the broad rim where the flat section of oak provides its natural shelf. The light spills across the dark wood and the iron hoops, illuminating the lid that you replaced earlier in the day. A lifetime ago, it seems, though it has only been a few hours. The lid still sits flush and true, its edges seated firmly in the worn groove, and you run your fingers around the seam, finding everything exactly as you left it. Then you curl your fingers under the lip and lift the lid away, setting it against the wall with the same careful motion you have used all day. The water inside the tub is still and clear and cold. The lamp flame reflects on its surface in a small, wavering point of gold, and below that surface the copper worm rests in its spiral, its curves glinting a deep reddish-brown through the water. You lean forward and look down into the tub, studying the water level with the careful attention of the day's final task. The level has held steady. The adjustment you made at the sluice has done its work, and the water reaches exactly to the mark you have scratched into the inner stave, a small horizontal line that only you know to look for. The coil is fully submerged, the topmost curve covered by a hand's span of water, and the cold that rises from the surface is the deep, clean cold of the spring. You dip your hand into the tub, as you did this morning, and let the cold close around your fingers. The temperature is exactly the same. The cool, biting freshness of water that has traveled from the heart of the hill without gaining any warmth from the day. Your fingertips brush the copper coil, and the metal is slick and cold and flawless. No trace of the green patina, no film of sediment. The few particles of grit you noticed earlier have settled to the bottom, and you will flush them when the season demands. But tonight, everything is as it should be. You withdraw your hand and dry it on the linen cloth that still hangs from its peg, the cloth now slightly damp from its earlier use, and then you reach for the small bucket that sits beside the tub. The bucket is half full of fresh water, drawn from the lade earlier in the day, and you lift it with both hands and tip it slowly over the tub. The water pours in a thin, steady stream, and you pour it against the inner wall so that it does not disturb the settled sediment at the bottom. The cold, clean water joins the water already in the tub, and the level rises slightly, compensating for the small loss from evaporation over the warm afternoon. You watch the surface climb until it reaches the scratch mark, and then just a fraction beyond, and you set the empty bucket aside and let the new water settle into stillness. Now you reach for the lid, lifting it from the wall and carrying it back to the tub. You fit the near edge into its groove, feeling the slight resistance of the wood finding its seat, and then you lower the far edge slowly, until the lid drops the final quarter-inch with the soft, hollow thud that has become one of the signature sounds of this day. You press down around the entire circumference, your fingers walking the seam where wood meets wood, and everywhere the fit is flush and true. The worm tub is closed, the coil submerged in its cold bath, the water holding at the mark, and the still house is ready for the night. You lift the oil lamp from the rim of the tub and carry it on a slow circuit of the still house, your final round of the space before you leave it to the darkness. The pot still rises silent and dark, its great copper belly reflecting the lamp's glow in a warm, distorted band. You pause beside it and lay your hand on the cool metal, feeling the slight swell of the riveted plates, the solid, patient weight as the vessel. The furnace door is closed as you left it, the ash within long cold. The washback stands empty, its tall wooden staves dry and silent. The spirit safe sits on its bracket, its brass fittings wrapped in linen and resting in their wooden box on the shelf. Everything is in its place, everything is at rest, and the quiet season holds the still house in its gentle, suspending hand. You walk to the high window and look out through the thick, bubbled glass. The glen outside is a world of deep shadow and faint starlight, the hillsides visible only as darker masses against the starfield. The burn a ribbon of reflected silver far below. A thin veil of mist has formed over the water, pale and ghostly in the darkness, and it moves slowly with the current, a silent, drifting presence. You watch it for a moment, the way it thickens and thins, the way it follows the burn's curves like a second, more ethereal stream, and then you turn away from the window and complete your circuit of the room. You stop at the shelf where the wooden box of polished fittings rests beside the oil lamp. You touch the lid of the box lightly, feeling the smooth, worn pine under your fingers, and you note that the small pot of chalk paste is sealed and tidy, the rags folded, the horsehair brush clean. All the small, precise objects of your care are in their places, ready for the day when the distilling season begins again and the spirit safe requires its brass back. But that day is still far off, somewhere beyond the quiet season, and for now the box will sit on its shelf, untouched and patient. You take up the oil lamp and carry it to the door, where you pause for the final time. The lamp's flame throws your shadow huge and wavering across the stone walls and the dark shapes of the still and the tub and the empty washback. You stand in the open doorway and look back into the still house, your eyes moving slowly from one familiar form to the next. The worm tub, its lid secure, its water cold. The pot still, silent and empty. The spirit safe, waiting. The high window, dark now, reflecting only the small flame of the lamp. All of it rests in a stillness so complete that it seems to have a presence of its own, a calm, abiding watchfulness that will hold through the night and into the next quiet day. You raise your hand to the lamp's small brass adjuster and turn it down, and the flame shrinks to a tiny blue bead that gutters once and then goes out. The darkness rushes in at once, absolute and soft, and you stand in it for a moment, letting your eyes adjust. The shapes of the still house are still there, visible now only as deeper patches of darkness against the dark, and the scent of copper and stone and cold water fills the air. You step through the doorway and pull the door closed behind you, and you fit the heavy iron key into the lock and turn it with the solid, final click that you have heard every night of this quiet season. You stand outside the still house door, your hand still resting on the key, and you listen. The burn's voice rises from the darkness, constant and unchanging, the same sound that has filled the glen since long before you arrived and will fill it long after. The smoke from the malt barn still rises, a faint pale column just visible against the stars, and the fire in the kiln pit burns on, steady and low, warming the drying malt through the deep hours of the night. A curlew calls once from the high moor, its voice a thin, lonely note that hangs in the air and then fades, and the silence that follows is vast and peaceful. You leave the still house and walk the familiar path toward the small white cottage where a single candle burns in the window. The path is the same path you have walked every night, the gravel crunching softly under your boots, the grass on either side dark and heavy with dew. The cottage sits at the edge of the yard, its whitewashed walls pale in the starlight, its thatched roof a dark rounded shape against the hill. The candle in the window is a small steady point of gold, and you walk toward it with the slow, easy pace of a man whose work is done. Halfway to the cottage, you stop and turn to look back at the still house. It stands dark and silent by the burn, its door locked, its roof sharp against the stars, its worm tub full of cold water. The shape of it is solid and timeless, a part of the glen as much as the stones and the water and the hills themselves. You look at it for a long moment, feeling the deep quiet of the night settle around you, and then you turn back toward the cottage and the candle, and the rest that waits. The crunch of gravel under your boots is the last sound of the day, and then the grass muffles your steps as you reach the cottage door. The candle flame flickers as you open the door and step inside, and then the door closes softly behind you, and the glen is left to the darkness and the stars and the constant, patient song of the burn. The still house stands silent by the water. The malt dries slowly on the kiln floor. The peat fire glows in its brick chamber, and the worm tub holds its cold vigil. All is quiet, all is still, and the quiet season stretches on into the deep and soundless night.